What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. My name is not Lucas Wenzel. My name is Tyler Plath, filling in for Lucas as we bring you the 8 players that you must start if you want to win your matchup in Week 7. Before I dig in, make sure you're subscribed, give this video a like, and if you have any start-sit questions, as we are in the midst of Bye-pocalypse with 6 teams on bye, we've got 2 opportunities for you to get those answered. You can drop them in the comments below of this video, and we'll be down there answering those. And Cameron will be live right here on our channel Sunday morning before kickoff answering all of your questions. So again, make sure you're subscribed. Have that notification bell turned on too, so you are notified when Cam goes live on Sunday and whenever else we post on the channel. So in Lucas's style, we'll go through 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends. So 8 players total that need to get into your lineups this week. And the first player we'll discuss is Brock Purdy, who takes on the Vikings on Monday Night Football. In 3 primetime regular season games in Brock Purdy's short but supposedly illustrious career. That's the vibe that I get with Brock Purdy. But anyway, 3 primetime regular season games for Brock Purdy so far, and he averages a quarterback 11 finish with 21 fantasy points per game. And this year alone, in 2 games, he's averaged a quarterback 10 finish with 23.2 fantasy points. Take that point per game total, and just to contextualize it, where would that be on the year? It would be the quarterback 2. On top of that, Minnesota is allowing the 9th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year. He needs to be locked into your lineup. He shines brightest when the lights shine bright, and you were probably going to start Purdy anyway, just because of all the teams that are on bye. But take this more as a vote of confidence than it is anything else, because Brock Purdy is going to step up in a big way this week. And the other quarterback must start that we have this week is Packers quarterback Jordan Love. And if it really feels like I've been talking a lot about Jordan Love recently on the channel, but he's a start for us this week. And while the Vegas game was really ugly, not just in a fantasy context, but just an actual NFL context, he's been productive in fantasy football. And even with the 8-point game against Vegas, he's the quarterback 8 in fantasy points per game. And if you take out the Vegas game, he's the quarterback 3 with the 4th most fantasy points per game. And now he's got Denver. Everyone knows that Denver is the matchup of the year. If you've got a player that's going up against Denver, you know it's going to be a good game from them. Denver's allowing quarterbacks to put up the 2nd most fantasy points per game against them. This is a smash matchup with one of the most productive quarterbacks this year in fantasy football. Don't overthink this one. We'll see a bounce back from Jordan Love, especially since they're coming off of the bye. Now switching things over to our running backs, first with Chiefs running back Isiah Pacheco, and the fellas have graciously and kindly let me victory lap this on them a couple times now, so I'm not going to do it again in this video, but Isiah Pacheco has just been a dude this year. He's 9th in expected fantasy points on the year. He's 11th in rushing attempts and yards of all running backs with 30 or more carries. And he got better last week because he overtook Jerick McKinnon in targets, making him a true bell cow back. At least in my opinion. Volume alone makes him a bell cow back. And he gets the Chargers this week, and they did just bottle Tony Pollard up on the ground in week 6. But I put air quotes on it because I really think it had more to do with the Dallas offensive line not playing well than it did the Chargers defensive line playing well. Credit to the Chargers for being able to stop Tony Pollard as much as they did on the ground, but Dallas's offensive line did Tony Pollard really no favors. Pollard was 5th in yards before contact per attempt in week 6 of all running backs with at least 10 carries. He had 0.8 yards. He couldn't even get a full yard before finding some kind of contact. I'm expecting the Chiefs to run the ball a bit better than the Cowboys did. So taking that plus everything that we've seen from Pacheco so far, if you had Pacheco, you were starting him anyway. But again, it's a vote of confidence with this kind of matchup for Isiah Pacheco. Good things can happen again this week. And the other running back start is Rhamondre Stevenson. And it's been a wild couple weeks with Rhamondre. In week 5, he was utilized the fewest amount of times this year with only 8 touches and saw a season low in routes ran. But he bounced back in week 6. He got back into the receiving game. He had a 20% target share in that game and even found the end zone with a rushing touchdown. Now, I've been on record saying that I'm still a little skeptical of Rhamondre for the rest of the year just because of how the offense is performing up to this point. It's just not been good. But this week, I'm not so skeptical because he takes on the Bills defense that are allowing the 6th most fantasy points to running backs the last 2 weeks and the 3rd most yards per carry on the year. There's a chance that Buffalo gets out ahead early and they stay ahead for the majority of the game. So it's not likely that the rushing production is what would get Rhamondre his fantasy points this week, but it's the receiving game. Okay, that was the big thing that came back in week 6. Again, the 20% target share that was on the decline before week 6. So again, Rhamondre, in our opinion, should be locked into your lineup just with the receiving work. If we don't see that and we kind of go backwards again from week 6, there's going to be some serious questions about how New England is utilizing arguably their best weapon, Rhamondre Stevenson. On to the wide receivers next, and Zay Flowers is becoming a very exciting wide receiver to watch, not just on Sundays, but in fantasy football as well. He's 12th in target share of all wide receivers. He's 12th in receptions. He's 9th in red zone targets, and he's 15th in expected fantasy points on the year. And he scored double-digit fantasy points in 5 of his 6 games this year. He's in the low-end flex conversation to mid wide receiver 2 conversation. There were a lot of Zay Flower fans during the draft process and even during fantasy draft season, and he's rewarding them handsomely at this point for the wide receiver 46 price tag he was going at in the 9th round. Fast forward to this week against the Lions, and you may be wondering why we're saying start Zay Flowers with what seems to be a tough matchup against the Detroit Lions and their surprisingly great defense this year. And it's because for how good the Lions defense has been, they are still allowing the 12th most fantasy points to wide receivers per game, on top of being 9th in receptions allowed and 1st in red zone touches allowed. So again, for a guy like Zay Flowers, who gets red zone opportunities, right? 9th in red zone targets, 12th in receptions, against a defense that's allowing the 9th most receptions, you can kind of see where the logic is going here. And if the Ravens want a chance at taking down the Lions, it's not going to be on the ground. You're not going to be able to beat this Detroit team, and especially the Detroit defense with Gus Edwards and Justice Hill. So you're going to need to air it out a bit, which, again, plays into Zay Flowers' hands. The other wide receiver start is DK Metcalf, and if things don't go well this week, we need to start having some serious conversations, because he was the wide receiver 22 heading into the bye week, which isn't the worst, right? It's not bad at all. But when you see that he's only finished inside the top 20 once this year, and that he's outside the top 25 wide receivers in air yards, air yard market share, and target share of all wide receivers, it certainly sounds the sirens, at least just in my head. But he has a chance to reverse all that this week against Arizona. And the Cardinals are allowing the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers on a per game basis, as well as the 5th most receptions and 2nd most yards on the year. If there's a week where we see the DK of old, it's likely going to be this week against a defense that I believe we can start picking on again. But as I said at the beginning, if he doesn't produce like we all expect him to, there's no more excuses, and there will be some tough conversations about DK Metcalf as someone that was highly regarded in fantasy drafts this year. But for this week, put him into your lineup. This could be a great week for DK Metcalf. Let's wrap things up with our tight end, starting with Kyle Pitts, baby. Kyle Pitts. Yep, you heard me right. Kyle Pitts is a must start for us in week 7. He's the tight end for the last 2 weeks, and over that stretch, he's 3rd in targets, he's 4th in yards, and he's 1st in air yards of all tight ends. The weird thing about all of that, though, is that he's done that on only 64% of the total team routes. Now, that doesn't sound great, but what if I told you that it's actually by design? There's a reason behind it. There's a purpose behind it. He's actually being used more as a wide receiver than he is a traditional tight end, and that's exactly what we've all been hoping for with Kyle Pitts. If you look at where he lines up for all of his snaps on a year, if you compare them year by year, it shows that he's being used more as a wide receiver. Let's look at his rookie year. He was used all over the formation, and he had an up and down season his rookie year. He lined up in the slot 37% of the time. He lined up in line as a traditional tight end 32% of the time, and he lined up out wide 31%. In 2022, arguably his worst year. I know he got injured, but even when he was playing, it wasn't good. He lined up on the line, in line, 38% of the snaps, 32% in the slot, and 26% out wide. So we saw him switch from slot to inline, and he saw less snaps out wide. That was not good. But this year, again, he's not being used like a traditional tight end. He's not lining up as much in line. 48% of his snaps are from the slot. He's out wide on 27% of his snaps, and he's in line on just 24% of his snaps. Kyle Pitts, again, is finally being utilized correctly, and we're seeing it in fantasy football. Again, the tight end for the past 2 weeks. And since he's being used more as a wide receiver, we can't really even say, oh, wow, their opponent is really good against tight ends, because he's really not a tight end at this point. Their opponent this week, Tampa Bay, is top 12 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Kyle Pitts has deserved a spot back in your lineups, and he should continue to be as long as the Falcons continue utilizing him the way that they are right now. The last tight end start that we'll discuss, is Darren Waller, who has quietly been 2nd in tight end receptions and target share, and 3rd in air yards over the last 2 weeks. That's helped him produce to be the tight end 7 over that stretch, and more good could be coming as he takes on a Washington defense that has been ripped apart by tight ends the last 2 weeks. Week 5 against the Bears, 18 total fantasy points to tight ends. That was the 9th most on that week. And in week 6 against the Falcons, 27.9 fantasy points, the most on the week. And that is also because Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith are the majority, if not all, of those fantasy points. But even if you took Kyle Pitts' points out, they still gave up 11, 12, 13 points even to Jonnu Smith. There's been one constant in the Giants offense, and that has been Darren Waller. So continue to ride him out because of what he's done lately, and with this matchup against Washington. It doesn't really matter even who his quarterback is. Tyrod Taylor, Daniel Jones, whoever. He's still going to be the focal point of the passing attack. So again, fire up Darren Waller. Don't doubt, don't question. Keep it easy. Keep it simple. All right, everyone, that wraps up the 8 players that you must start this week. And a quick recap of those players. Our quarterbacks are Brock Purdy and Jordan Love. Our running backs are Isiah Pacheco and Rhamondre Stevenson. Our wide receivers are Zay Flowers and DK Metcalf. And our tight ends are Kyle Pitts and Darren Waller. Thanks for tuning in. Like I said at the very beginning, make sure you're subscribed. Give this video a like. If you have any start-sit questions, you can drop them in the comments below this video. But also, Cam will be live right here on Sunday morning before kickoff answering all of your questions. So again, make sure you're subscribed and have that notification bell turned on so you know when he goes live so you can join in and ask your questions. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you on Monday with the latest edition of Waiver Wire Monday. Deuces.